Hi, I want to welcome you to a workshop focused on a happy and healthy valley. We thought we would cap the event at 40 people, but there was so much interest and we didn't want to turn anyone away. So closer to 80 people were involved, as you will see. As one person wrote to me what she hopes for this gathering, for this workshop, that it be a timely and needed shift in perspective. That's our hope too. And we hope for you that it will be a welcomed and spacious perspective. We're so grateful that you're watching this and might become part of it. I am Kinney Perot and on the board of Friends of the Mad River. After 30 years of bringing people together for healthy land, clean water, and a vibrant community, Friends of the Mad River is reflecting on all we've learned and what must be envisioned and acted upon next. This is part of that exploration for us, together with all of you. But this work today at the workshop, and then continuing in 2 weeks, and then maybe even going beyond that, is much, much larger than Friends of the Mad River or our mission. It's about our home and community here in the Mad River Valley, aptly named the Mad for its flashy and changeable nature, as we all know. It's good to remember that we are accustomed to change and can thrive in it. I introduced the board of Friends of the Mad River and the staff. The board includes Ned Farquhar, Scotia Norton, Matt Williams, Katie Sullivan, Jeannie Nicholas, Richard Chaplinsky, Brian Shoup, and me. And our staff, our executive director is Corey Miller, and we also have two staff, Ira Shaddis and Lisa Koich. So why do we have Regenesis leading us? They've worked all over the world, bringing people together in service to creating joint visions and acting upon them. And they have a depth of knowledge about the Mad River watershed and community. They've taught classes here steeped in the geology, the history, and the community. This valley is a net, a dream catcher for possibilities, while at the same time, we're solidly dwelling in the reality of this place, including its beauty and kind community. What inspires me most about welcoming Bill and Joel from Regenesis is that in regenerative thinking, they offer an opportunity to shift our perspective on shaping the future from the process we're used to, which is sort of starting with the problems and then trying to find solutions to those problems. It shifts it from that to one where we all recognize we're part of the ecology of this place and can bring value to it as we work together. What we can create together develops both internally and externally. So I'm excited to stretch our thinking and hearts together, to take a chance on improving our valley, not just keeping it from getting wrecked or deteriorated, but dreaming much bigger. Our various interests can thrive, fitting well into a larger whole as we create a vision of our pulling in the same direction. Holding in mind both the challenges we face and the potentials we envision helps us not to collapse under the weight of focusing too narrowly and tightly on problems. At a past Regenesis-led presentation, in a small group I was in, a few people from this community responded to a question of what motivates them, the why of doing this type of work. The response was, from a few, survival. And I thought that was a very low bar and quite uninspiring. I want us to imagine that we can go beyond survival, not that that isn't important, obviously, to developing an even more healthy, thriving, and meaningful community. I think and feel Regenesis process will draw much out of us: inspiration, creativity, fun, and an essential and rewarding future to aim toward. And the inspirations will not end in one workshop, but will develop as we reimagine and fine-tune our future together again and again in response to what we learn along the way. So I then turned it over to Bill Reed and Joel Glansberg of Regenesis, who I first met at the Yes Tomorrow Design Build School class, where we actually started every morning before sitting down and, or, designing something or learning in a lecture, we would do, we would start each morning with centering movement exercises outside very early. It was great. So I'm not going to take the time here to go over their impressive bios. You can go to their website and find all that out. And I just, it was a wonderful exploration that we're continuing with Bill and Joel. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Kenny, and our board. And before we get into, I'm kind of wondering whether we get into the housekeeping before or after. Let's do housekeeping now. Anybody who has, can you see the blue dots, the 3 blue dots or 3 white dots on a blue field? When you hit your picture, please put your name in that, the name you prefer to be called by. So when we call on you or have a conversation, we can actually refer to the right person. So please do that anytime you feel like it. And thank you, Kenny, and thank you, Corey, for setting this up. We've been planning this for the last couple of months. And before we get in further, it'd be great to have an acknowledgement of the land that we are on. And Joel, would you please?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Kenny, and thank you, Corey, for making this happen, and everybody else for showing up. I just want us to remember the original peoples of this land who are still with us, Abenaki, Wabanaki peoples, Haudenosaunee to the north. And just make that conscious in our awareness as we're thinking about the future of this place, that past continues into the future, and we'll be addressing that later in our conversation as well. So I just wanted to take a moment to remember the original peoples and for their continued stewardship of such a beautiful place that we have the privilege to inherit and live on and live with.
Thank you. All right, folks, by way of introduction, this is a 2-part series. This is one of 2, and the idea is to have an introduction to a strategic visioning process for the entire valley in 2021 at some point, if there is interest. So right now, this is an introduction to a different way of thinking. And Kenny explained that, I'll just underline it, is that this work is about growing our ability to work on the whole system. And typically we work in fragments and pieces. And as a result, we end up with a fair amount of unanticipated consequences. The reductionism world, while very valuable, has also backed us into a corner. And I love what Dwight Eisenhower said: when you have trouble solving a problem, enlarge it. And that's what we're doing in these 2 introductory series, from these 2 introductory sections. And one example of unanticipated consequences, Joel, I know one of your favorites is Hurricane Irene, right? Why don't you share that perspective?
Yeah, I was telling Bill this morning that we were there in the Mad River both before and after Irene, and how striking it was that after that catastrophe, how quickly people began to spend time and money and energy rebuilding 50-year-old infrastructure that was in the wrong place, instead of using the same amount of time and energy and money to begin to put into place the infrastructure of the next 50 years. And it's just, we tend to drive by looking in the rearview mirror. And what we're going to work on in these 2 sessions is look at the past as an indication of the potential of the future, instead of getting caught in trying to make America great again, make the Mad River great again. Instead, looking into the potential of what is the unrealized potential of this place? What does the next 50, 100 years look like? That is not about survival, as Kenny said, but is really about thriving and greater richness and beauty and enjoyment.
Okay. So we're not talking about legislating change or a typical planning process. This is about actually uniting us in a common vision, and from that vision, then understanding, holding a vessel, if you will, so that we actually can address what this place needs and who and what needs to be contributed. So the question is, what are future generations calling on us to do now? And we're hoping that this is the opportunity to use the past to see the future. So I know that Corey asked for reflections about, I think it was what you love about this place, right, Corey, in the responses. Those were quite interesting. We're actually going to do a quick breakout group, generally with about maybe 10 minutes, about 3 people per group. It won't be exactly even. And what we'd like you to do is converse and have a reflection on, what do you care about? And caring is an action, right? Caring is an act of love, if you will. What do you care about to engage, and what are you caring about in this valley? What are the opportunities you're caring into? What's the potential you see that you might want to care about? Mm-hmm. And what would be great is if you can decide amongst yourselves, amongst the 3 or 4 of you, one person should be a recorder to take these notes down, whether you do it on your laptop or your iPhone or a piece of paper, and then send those to Friends of the Mad River Valley so that we can compile them.
So I want to make one thing clear. We have too many people for everyone to speak at the same time and introduce ourselves. And what we're really trying to do is give everybody an opportunity to converse with their neighbors, as it were. And we're really trying to look at, what is it that motivates us? Not only the ideas we have, what we want to do, what we want from one another, but what is it that we're caring about that's motivating us to be here in the first place and to want to participate in an ongoing process.
Great.
So it's also a way of getting to know one another and create a different platform to begin this entire discussion from.
Right. This is going, and we need to understand that what we're doing, you're not going to have necessarily an aha moment from today. This is an arc of building an understanding. It takes time to build a whole. So have some patience with this as we unfold this system with you. And you unfold it with us.
So
right.
Corey, do you have the breakout groups all set up?
I'll be doing that, Joel.
Okay, great. You all set, Bill?
I'm going to do it right now. So hang on.
So you will get an invitation. If you don't know, please accept the invitation to the breakout room, and then you'll get a warning a minute before you're coming back, and you can just wait and you'll be miraculously brought back into this larger room. And it'd be great to turn on your screens, your cameras, so the people that you're talking to can see you. And we really just want you to reflect on what got you to show up today. What is it that you care about in this place that is motivating you to be here?
Somebody asked,
I'll put it in the chat.
Yep, thank you, Joel. I don't know if you all can see the chat once we break out. So let's just take a second. Say when, Joel.
Ed, the invite will pop up on your screen. Sometimes it's now coming in the top right corner, and you'll just hit go into breakout room or something like that. So you don't need to look anywhere else. It should pop up.
Here we go. And remember to pick a recorder because we want to track this. Okay, thanks all. Here we go.
And I forgot the question mark. So Bill, you and I are not going into a breakout.
Right. There might be, I might move a couple of people from room 12. Let me do that. I'm going to move 12. go.
Did everybody get an invitation?
Let's see, Peter and Olivia. I don't know who. Hi, sir. I don't know your name. Is it Olivia Hobb? Did you get an invitation?
Did they join late, perhaps, Bill?
Yeah, maybe so. Hi there. Can you see me? Guess that was that. Peter Hayes, can you hear me?
She probably hasn't accepted it.
Yeah. So we just started at 4:21, Joel.
Okay, and okay, so we're giving them 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like they have 2 hours and 10 minutes.
What's that? Sorry?
It's 2:21 here.
Oh, yes, they do. That would be a problem if you're literal. All right. Oh, Britain's there.
And Bill, do you want me to ask the reflection question when they come back?
Sure.
And we'll hear a couple reflections.
And then I'll do the purpose one, right?
I thought we were doing the story of place first.
Yeah, no, I was yeah, right. I was just jumping ahead. After you're going to go right into the story of place.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll capture a few reflections and then I'll start on that.
Right. Wow, quite a nice showing. 70 people.
That's impressive. I was thinking we'd get 30.
Yep.
Maybe 40.
Well, it's a cold day. It's cloudy. It's snowing a little.
It's the end of the day.
We had a fun workshop in New Hampshire.
Great. How did that go?
Did really well. And ended up with a really motivated group. And TR, I said, you know, guys are that motivated. We got a TRP course happening here. But interestingly enough, they were talking about Durham and all the stuff going on there. So.
Hey, when I went online, there's an email from Pamela. You know, she has this Google tracker when regenerative development shows up, and there's something, this group Regenerative Reno that I guess Ray's been working with.
Oh yeah, I haven't heard from Ray in a long time. I put a call.
And I guess she said the website is full of our language, but everyone from John Fullerton to Daniel Christian Wall is listed as a partner, but not us.
That's weird. Yeah, because I spent time with that guy. You know. Well.
Pause the recording, Bill.
Oh yeah, right. Thank you.
So we're waiting for everybody who's milking their last minute.
Well, we'd love to know who you are.
Who we are?
I think that was the tail end of someone else's conversation. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So I just want you all to reflect for a moment on what was the difference in reflecting about what you cared about instead of your ideas. How did that orient your mind to have a different kind of conversation than if you're thinking about your ideas that you want to push? So why don't we ask you to think about what you cared about? And can you notice that it made any difference in how you showed up and where you're at now? I just want to capture a few reflections if people have some thoughts. So please speak them out, because we'll get lost trying to read them in the chat. So I have one, ownership. It was more personal. Anybody else have a thought about what difference it makes when we think about what's motivating us to work on something?
Yeah, I'll go. It's like really we're talking about values, and if your decision making is based on values, then it's just more entropy, more inertia carries through than if you're just advocating for an idea.
That matters. Anybody else?
I found that we really built on each other's comments. It just kept growing.
I felt like there was so many shared ideas, and the idea of community and caring for the community, I think, shone through in three very different people who came here for different reasons, but that was important, just the caring for the community.
So
I think what came through the three of us was generosity of the Valley and how important that is in a successful community.
Great. So oftentimes what we're caring about.
What struck, so just can I add 1 point?
Please.
I found that thinking about this in terms of moving forwards and being creative rather than fixing problems, however to describe that, but it made me think about not what drew me here necessarily, but what would enhance the community better going forwards. This is beyond my own desires and reasons for moving to the Valley. So I think that was a sort of taking it from a different perspective drew me out more into a forward thinking outside of my own box perspective.
Could I mention something? Carl may want to add to it, but because he was the monitor, but I didn't think we had nearly enough time to get our point across, even though we did have very, very mutual understanding of what each other was saying. The subject is so wide and so important that we needed more time.
Absolutely. You're going to get lots of time.
And I just want to say, this is a tease, right? That we want you to say, I want to have this conversation, right? I want to go deeper into this conversation, that this is really important. And as Lisa was pointing out, that caring is way beyond each of our approaches of how we think we should get there, right? So it's something that can orient us all. Did you have something else you wanted to add, Eric?
I just want to thank Corey and the Mad River Valley, Friends of the Mad River Valley, for letting us speak, because I think they are the key to making this valley more sustainable and a better place to live. I want to get my chance in there to thank both.
Great, thank you. And I would just want to say, I think part of what's being talked about is to not have it be us and Friends of the Mad River, but we're all friends of the Mad River, right? So we're all in this together and working on this together as keys to the future of the Valley.
And can I ask you, for those of us who didn't speak for our group, you said to write out what was said. How do we submit that to you?
And I think it will be in the chat, but we will talk about it at the end. It's info@friendsofthemadriver.org. You'll send it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we're gonna give you a homework assignment to put together all the stuff from, because we can't hear everything in the little groups and we don't have time to have everyone share out. And you might notice the reflection question wasn't about the content so much as what difference did it make to your thinking when we centered it on caring, right?
Also, you might keep track just on a notepad next to the computer what you're experiencing and what reflections you have. It'd be great to hear those.
All right. So we're going to begin by talking about the Mad River Valley. And I'm going to do a little PowerPoint presentation that I did a few years ago, an earlier version of this that I think was on the local community television station for some time, because I was back visiting the Mad River Valley and someone said, "Hey, I saw you on television doing this presentation about history and the rest of the Mad River Valley." And what we're going to do is, instead of be driving by looking in the rearview mirror, we're going to use the whole process that's brought us to this point to help us look at the potential future. So if we can see it as a trajectory, and we can have greater understanding from that, that's how we're going to think about moving forward. Thank you. So I'm going to go through this fairly rapidly, and I can only see a few of your faces, but we'll talk about this when we're done. So, this is the beautiful Mad River Valley. And like every other piece of this living earth, it's unique, does things in a unique way. As you all know, it's probably why you're there as opposed to other places. It works differently than Burlington or Brattleboro or Boston or New York City. And that's both how the human and non-human systems work there. And they have, just as each of us has a different potential and different nature and ways of working, so does every place. So that's what we're looking at today. So one of the things that's really striking about the Mad River Valley is just how constrained it is. It's this deep, narrow valley that has relatively little fertile topsoil, a narrow channel to the river basin. You can see it really clearly in this really nice 3D representation. It's one of the most defined and narrowest valleys in Vermont. You can see it right here. Right, this is the Winooski coming through here, and here's the Mad River coming up here. You can see it in each of these. It's incredibly narrow and constrained between mountains on either side. Yeah, and because of this sort of feather-shaped valley, valleys are either shaped like a tree, a dendric shape, or they're narrow and long like a feather, like the Mad River Valley. And when they're this feather shape, each of these tributaries is very short, so the flow in the main channel builds up very rapidly. So you get much faster flood peaks than you do in a more tree-shaped valley. Right? And this all came together by the collision of continental plates and the uplifts. This is when what is now Africa slammed into Avalonia and Laurentia, what is now North America, and caused the uplift of these long north-south trending mountain ranges and valleys. And of course, we know those got worn down by the glaciers, probably at least 3 glaciations up to a mile thick that really shaped this landscape. And you can see in this photo, these were sedimentary rocks, layered rocks that got turned on their sides. And so they were hardened by pressure and heat, became metamorphosed, and helped to constrain this river. So you get this pattern of this narrow valley, hard mountains constraining it on either side, the glaciers wearing those mountains down, these small pockets of favorable agricultural soils in the valley. And it's a really funny thing, right? That we think of the Mad River Valley as being an agricultural valley, but if you were a farmer, you'd be much better off going to a big valley like along Lake Champlain or along the Connecticut River Valley, right? That there's something about the preciousness of the soils that make them well used. Right? One of the central characters in this part of the world is the beaver, right? And they not only spawned the beaver wars and the beaver trade and all of that, but their whole main thing they're doing is making these dams that restrain the water, restrain the soils, and many of the soils that we have may well have been collected behind beaver dams, that there are these alluvial layers of soil that were created by the restraints of the beaver dam. So the restraining mountain ranges, the restraining glaciers, the restraints of the beaver. And all of this made me think of a Abenaki Wabanaki story from Joe Bruchac. And it's about this guy, Gluskabi, who was the creator's helper. And he's traveling around one day and he comes to a village and he can't find anybody. And the cornfields are all full of weeds and the fires are all out and everything's dirty and unkept. And he can't find anybody. And eventually he is groaning out in the forest. And he goes in the forest, and in those days, it wasn't sap that ran through the sugar maples, but syrup. And everyone has broken off a branch on a maple tree and is laying beneath and letting the syrup pour into their mouths. And they've grown obese and they're filthy and they haven't taken care of anything. And he realizes, oh, we made it too easy. And he goes and gets a huge birch bark basket and scoops up water from the river and pours it over the sugar maples, and he thins their sap to what they're like today. And as soon as it turns from syrup to sap, everybody sort of sits up and he gets them all up and he explains to them that they're going to have to work for the syrup now. They're going to need to chop wood and they're going to need to go and collect that sap, and they're going to have to learn to work together, and they're going to have to learn how to take care of one another. And they're going to have to take care of the children and take care of the cornfields and put out effort. And that it actually is the restraints of the cold and the work that's required, and even the extreme temperatures, right? The sap only flows when it goes from warm to cold. And that's what's going to teach them how to be full people. It's going to teach them how to have full, strong communities. And one of the things I always do when I try to understand a place is look at a somewhat similar nearby place to look what's different. And I thought it was really different, just the imagery of Stowe versus Sugarbush in the Mad River Valley, that there's something about the Mad River that's agriculturally oriented, that it really just speaks to people's sense of not a sort of Colorado-ish ski chalet, Switzerland, but this more land-based working landscape place. Right. And as we all know, it's very unique. Yeah, and prides itself on its uniqueness. One of the stories that we heard about the Warren 4th of July is that at one point, someone got really drunk and had a terrible car accident. And that there was general agreement to tone it down, to make sure nobody got hurt, that it wasn't legislated, and there were no increased rules created, but the community as itself realized that they needed to work and play differently. So the party continues, but there's this kind of awareness, a conscious restraint, keeping everybody in line, keeping us all in check from going too far, right? So this first pattern, which is about how does this place work, from all of these, from the beaver to the mountains to the farmland to the Abenaki story to that story about 4th of July, the phrase that we came up with was naturally restraining. Right? There's even something about a one-chair chairlift, which is a restraint, right? Which makes the Glen unique. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about 3 patterns that I saw, and then we'll talk about them. And what I'm asking you to do as we're going through these is think about your own experience there. Is there a way in which being isolated in the valley, the extreme temperatures in the winter, the snows, all these various things, are they restraining in ways that helped create the uniqueness of this place? So, given these natural restraints, the harsh winters and the floods and the isolated nature of the place, resources have always been scarce here, right? It's not the fat, rich place. It's always been an edgy place. And that has caused everyone who's lived here from the Wabanaki till now to need to be creative and resourceful to make it here, right? And many things have initiated in the Mad River, from canoes to wood stoves, small dog electronics, really good beer, northern power systems, Mad River Glen. Many things have initiated here and then spread elsewhere and grown. And this has long been the case. I was amazed to see both of these pictures. There's a steam engine on tracks for pulling logs in the winter and a horse-drawn log splitter. And once again, the whole idea of gathering sap and boiling it down into sugar or syrup is a really creative way of using the resources of a place, right? There weren't honeybees in North America when Europeans first came here. It's a very uniquely Northern North America practice. And part of this innovation has always been a need to be diversified. So people often would maybe log in the summer or farm in the spring, collect butternuts during butternut season, that there was always a change in how people were working on things, and there needed to be. And this continues into this day, right? People are always innovating here, whether it's from good beer to raising yaks to making cheese to even how that cheese is marketed, meat products, butchering things themselves. There's this still innovative diversity going on in all kinds of ways. And it's really clear in the agriculture movement. It's also clear in things like Yes Tomorrow and the other educational things that are going on in the Valley. Again, the 4th of July is an opportunity to see this, as well as the farmers markets, right? And many things have been started uniquely here. We heard this great story about how the big picture some years ago, its energy bills were so huge that it was going to have to go out of business. And they needed to do an energy retrofit of the building, which they couldn't afford to do either. And so the community came together to make it happen. Same thing about how the Vermont Food Bank and Kingsbury Farm came about. And, for years, I had a Vermont Castings wood stove in my house. So all these things that initiated in the Valley, and a diversity, right? Diversity of things initiating in different kinds of media. And this picture of Buck and Bales is there because heard a story when we were there about a farmer who was ill, and how all the other farmers took turns mowing his hay fields and coming together to make sure they could buck his bales until he could get better. So I called this pattern resourceful community, that given the narrow resources, the kind of limited resources of the place, it's not as many people, as much money, as good farmland, as many industries as some place like Burlington or Brattleboro or even to the north, Toronto. But it has a way of making do and of coming together to make important things happen. So why is there a flatbread called Punctuated Equilibrium? Yeah. So you all know what punctuated equilibrium is, that there's relatively stable times, relatively long stable times, and then those are punctuated by some kind of disturbance. And it may be a glaciation, it may be an earthquake, it may be a financial downturn, but there have been this relative stability of the valley has been punctuated by many changes. Everything from the tectonic plates colliding and the uplifts, the glacial periods, the interglacial lakes, and then the valleys, the clearings of the forest, right? If you go up valley, there's this great big house and barn in the middle of the forest on a very narrow piece of land. And it made me realize the only thing that could have built that barn and that house was when the forests were cleared and they were grazed by sheep, right? So it's a very different landscape when those forests were cleared and then the sheep boom. And then when the sheep boom went away, and then the ski area is coming in and changing everything drastically, the last best place era, and climate, floods of water, visitors, crops, and snow tend to be extreme. And this tends to weed out who likes to live here, whether it's plants, people, animals, businesses, organizations. That there's a reason that there's a flatbread in the valley called Punctuated Equilibrium. Yeah. And you can see it in the rocks, right? It's the collision that created not just the ridges, but the hard metamorphosed rock that polishes so beautifully in the river. Yeah. And again, the glaciations and the lakes that those created when the water began to melt. So above Yestermorrow, there's an art center. I think it's still there. It's been closed down for many years. It's this beautiful little flat there. That's because it was a beach from one of the glacial lakes. So for a very long time, the valley looked very different than we think about it. And of course, we're all familiar with the different floods and what those cause, the way the river causes and sculpts and carves the rock of the valley. The beaver and how they create these drastic changes in the river, how the drastic change and punctuation of the whole fur trade and the beaver wars, what we call the French and Indian War now, was all because of these little guys. And again, the extremes that make it possible to make maple sugar, that it has to be, if it doesn't get cold enough in the winter, you don't get a flow. If it doesn't get warm enough during the day, you don't get a flow. That you have to have these extremes, and people gather these scarce resources and concentrate them into this sweet harvest of the community. I think it's a great metaphor for the place. And the extremeness of the place brings people here. Extreme skiing, extreme kayaking, extreme music. And people have often talked about those extreme forms being the sort of most essentialized, purest forms of the valley. And there's a way in which the valley has this way of bringing out the unique character of individuals and sort of polishing their essences. So here's our 3 patterns: naturally restraining, this resourceful communitying, and what that all creates is this concentrated essentializing. Right? So you see it in the farmland, you see it in the farm products, you see it in the ways that people live. And I'm wondering if you didn't even see it in what you were talking about caring about. And I just love to hear, not so much questions, but I'm happy to talk about questions. But did those ideas, did those vignettes ring true for you? Did they, what did they stir in you? Are those the kind of things that you value about this place? You guys all know it intimately. Is it that restraining? Is it that resourcefulness and that essentializing? Is that part of what attracts you to the valley? Or is the valley really different than that essentialization of understanding the place? Or is it not quite right and altered a little bit?
I'll speak up. I found it very relevant to a mountain community. And in my work, I've been in the ski business for a long time. And currently I work with a lot of mountain communities. I would think that what you described is true to a lot of mountain towns, especially in New England, and even some out west, and very much so in Europe, where especially the natural restraint is very challenging, the lack of resources and adjustment in farming and agriculture. And so that gives me pause to say, I mean, a lot of people have spoken. I've been involved in visioning here in the Valley a number of different times over the course of, especially the last decade, that people say we're so unique. I would really question that. We love the place. There's no question about that. So we think that we have to say it's unique. I've done a very similar type of thing in Killington, and I can almost tell you that the words that you're saying were repeated by the citizens of Killington, almost verbatim. And so it is, I think we have to recognize that it's mountain communities that have this sort of same general makeup of what you described, and I thought you described it very well. But it's, I question the uniqueness of it. It's not just in this one little spot.
Great. So I agree with you, and I think all of this is intended to be a draft, right? So we can continue to hone. So what is the difference between this valley and Killington, right? I think one of the things that's different is there's a greater agricultural concentration here than there is there. I may be wrong about that, but this is the conversation that we need to be having is, okay, what is it that is, how can we hone our understanding of this place and the unique ways of working here that we can learn from all the similar places around us and they can learn from us as well? Other thoughts, reflections?
I agree with the characterization, Joel, that you offered. I've been fortunate enough to also spend a lot of time in a small community on Martha's Vineyard in the town of Chilmark, and it has similar kind of natural constraints. And it's a seasonal community as well, and I think there's a seasonality to the service industry that you probably pointed out, but I can't remember where in your discussion you did. But what underpins, to me in this valley, what underpins that seasonality is the constant commitment and closeness of the people who call this place home. And I see that, you know, Bob, you mentioned you've seen similar characteristics in other communities. I see that also in a community on Martha's Vineyard. So I don't think we are unique. And therefore, I think there's great promise to learn from other communities that are similar.
So I would love to hear why you call it a seasonal community. Which season?
I think it's the people who don't call this place their year-round home who visit seasonally. So there's definitely a tranche or cohort of people who love to summer here. There's a cohort of people who love to come here and ski and enjoy the outdoors in the winter. Both of those cohorts, I think, in my limited experience, seem to not enjoy mud season or stick season. And to me, those are times when you can be when the valley is most intimately available and the people are have a little bit different focus, I think, than they do during those peak tourist seasons.
Great, thanks.
Well, one of the things about Vermont is that its economy has always been tied to the land, so that when you go back in history and look, there's been a history of it being all agriculture, farming, and the effects of agriculture and farming and land clearing has always had its impact on sustaining the character of natural resources. It then moved into part agriculture and then a lot of industry. I mean, you're going to look at logging and how big that was and the effects that logging had on changing, again, natural resources, changing the rivers, etc. What Vermont's main economy is right now is tourism. Recreation, it's tourism. Recreation and tourism is important to the economy, which is why you're going to be able to say, well, we're a seasonal economy. Well, we're seasonal in lots of different seasons. I mean, you take out mud season and you take out stick season, which we not only, we figure tourists avoid, but I see it also as a time when the entire valley gets a breather from how its economy is in the winter, in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall. So if you say we're seasonal, yeah, seasons. But I think what you're looking at right now is the new economy in Vermont, which is recreation, skiing, biking, etc. And that money is important, but there's a big tension there in how do we want to keep our natural environment and also provide a robust economy for people to be able to thrive here.
Great, thank you. And I just want to underline a couple things. Vermont has always prided itself on being a working landscape, a place that is integrated between people working the land, whether it's in forestry or agriculture, and a beautiful and strong natural landscape, right? Those two tied together. And I think when we're going to talk more about this today is tourism is up in the air, right? I'm not sure about Vermont, but no ski areas are opening in New Mexico this month and probably not next month. And even Taos, when they do open, they have to have 50% capacity, right? So the entire tourism industry is not what it was. And I heard a thing several years ago, something like 45 states in the union, the number one industry is tourism, right? Which is something to ponder how that's even possible. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Bobby. You were trying to say something before. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's always interesting to me because I actually moved to Warren without even knowing there was a ski area there. So I moved in the 1970s, in 1974. And it was very different for us. We, kind of had a wonderful community that was kind of here, that I had friends involved with. And I just, some of what, going back to the PowerPoint and thinking about some of the pictures and thinking about wood stoves. And we lived, my father came to visit us and we were sitting around in our very leaky house with a very leaky stove. And we were learning about self-reliance. And we were becoming adults and we were learning to be independent. And I think what I loved the most was I was in a place where I could become whatever it was I was going to be able to become. And it was very exciting. I mean, having grown up in the suburbs in New York, I was definitely a transplant. But I found opportunities here that really made me, in Yiddish, the word is a mensch. I really, there was something about being here. So I just wanted to add that because not all of us came because of the mountain, and yet the mountain has made this place livable and viable when river industries died out and other kinds of things and changes happened. My husband went to a prep school in Washington, and the decanon of the school, the head of the school, when he found out we were living here, his face sunk and he just was like, oh, really? Because he was here as part of the Episcopal Archdiocese or whatever it was. And he remembered a very depressed, very forlorn community. So those changes come back and forth. So this is a very viable place to live because of the ski area and because of the diversity. But we do have the big disparities. Anyway, all of those things being true.
Great, thank you.
I think Shelby and Grady wanted to speak, Joel.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of builds off of your comment, Bobby, but I think, I don't know if this falls both within the constraint and essentialism patterns you pointed out, but a word that really comes to mind for me, and this may be, this may be true, and I think it is true in a lot of Vermont communities that have a dominant formation around countercultural movement of the 70s, but I think there's an irreverence to a lot of the culture in the Valley that leads to creativity, or has led historically to creativity, entrepreneurship, and I think that I just kind of wanted to put that word on the board, that irreverence, that I kind of hold very dear, and sometimes question how honestly I'm contributing to it, but
Thanks. Yeah, someone else wanted to speak?
Yeah, I'm coming from Greensboro, and have only been here a short time, but came up here as a young person, like 15, 16 years old, and was very impressed by the work ethic of the farmers, and got to know one family and their two sons anyway, and some of the daughters too, but and was amazed at how they were like living. I mean, they just seemed a huge family in a small house, and very hard workers. And so coming from the suburbs, I mean, it was kind of like a complete culture shock for me. And but I was very inspired by their kind of work ethic. And to the degree when we came up here and finally decided we were going to live here full time, I mean, a lot of that had an influence on me. And in terms of the presentation and the history, let's say, of the Mad River Valley, it's kind of inspiring me to think much more about what are the kind of hallmarks of history in the Greensboro area, and to follow that through as part of being concerned with the Lamoille River and what's happening to it and how it influences the Lake Champlain, but really wanting to underpin, that kind of concern with an understanding of the history of the place. Because I think that that's really important. I think that trying to reach people and talk to them, you really have to appreciate their history, the history of families in the area, how they came to live here, or the Native Americans in the area that preceded the Europeans. Otherwise, you're just kind of, I think you don't have much substance, unless you come from the perspective of really wanting to understand that history. So I thank you, Joel, for that short history of the Valley.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to bring this thing up again that I don't know other ski areas so well in the East or in Europe, but I certainly know ski areas here in the West, in New Mexico and certainly Colorado. And I don't know of another ski area, valley, that is so agriculturally oriented, that has had so many different kinds of technological and business related innovative things like Prickly Mountain, things like Yestermorrow, things like Small Dog Electronics, things like Vermont Wood Castings, wood stoves, and in general, in most ski communities I'm familiar with, the original community has entirely been displaced. There's not been a kind of continuation of it that has still intact, that there are some places where agriculture continues to exist, but it's because in very limited sections, because land trusts were created. It's not something that's been able to be viable on its own based upon the rise in real estate prices, right? So may not be the case throughout Vermont, but it's certainly what I see here in the West. And it's, so for me, it may look unique in ways that it's not so obviously unique to you guys there in Vermont, if that's the case in Killington and Stowe and the other places as well. Yeah, Eric, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to just pick up on what you said and what Bobby Roode said. And I couldn't help but think back when I first came to the Valley. I didn't recognize the diversification here until one day Carl Klein mentioned Paul Hartshorn to me. Now, Paul Hartshorn to me is the epitome of the Valley, an old timer, a farmer in a way, because he's a logger, and his son, David, who has one of the most impressive industries I've ever seen so quickly developed in this Valley, which is his greenhouse setup. And that's all the same family. But along that line, I have to think about a person like Robin Morris, who was really an outsider that came to this Valley and saw this old Mad River canoe building and just sitting there, and made it into what it is today, which is a place for these same little farmers all over the Valley to actually be a second, process their food, so to speak. In fact, that's what they do. And then he opened up Taste Place, and then another person that picks up on the same thing is George Schenk with Yestermorrow, and that's why I was so happy up the Punctuated Equilibrium, and how he has taken a kind of a local, made a local industry out of a kind of a farm that wasn't doing much, and made it into this unique little cell of agriculture and business and people that, even with this this flu epidemic that has basically taken over a lot of the food industry, especially in serving, and kept it going. And it's all because of the hard work that people have been talking about, that farmers are so used to doing and think nothing of it. But the epitome of the Valley, I think I found out here when I first moved here, and that's Waitsfield Telecom. That place blows my mind. I mean, how can you have a telephone company that is actually works and provides for the whole Valley and the surrounding areas? And that's this, a remnant of the telephone industry, and so much a part of the community at the same time. And I just couldn't help but throw that stuff out there to you, because to me, that is what the Valley is.
Thank you. And, I don't know much about it. I heard lots of stories about the old bobbin mill and all the stuff that went on in the bobbin mill, and how people were creating different wood stoves back in the day, and Vermont Castings came out of there, and there were several others, and there was this kind of thing going on. But what's important is we're not looking for certainty. We're not looking for the truth or answers. We're looking for questions where we're still curious. And these are real questions, right? And we're going to have a chance to continually revisit these as alive questions, because what we're really after here is not what has been called thoughting, which is reintroducing thoughts we had before, but actually having creative thoughts, right? Coming up with ideas, seeing from perspectives that we haven't before, right? So Bill's going to talk a little bit more about that. So all of this is very time compressed. And as I said before, it's meant to be a little bit of a tease, right? If we come up with the answers and we all say things we thought before, we're all going to get bored and go away. And what I'm hoping is that we'll want to continue these conversations because they seem interesting and we're not sure. So we're curious.
Yeah, and we haven't solved any problems yet anyway. So onward. And so that's a perfect setup to we've given a grounding, if you will, kind of where we're headed and what our investigation is. And now we're going to set back to talk about the purpose of these 2 sessions. And then hopefully that will lead into some other work downstream in 2021. But I'm going to share with you a purpose statement that we developed with some of the board members, and for us to consider and do some thinking and not thoughting. David Bohm said, we do a lot of thinking, thoughting in our culture. We don't do much thinking. And so this is meant to challenge us a little bit. Let me share my screen.
And this is the purpose for today's session.
And the next one too.
Okay, thanks. What are we here for?
Yeah. All right. So one of the, this is a very layered statement. It's kind of an understatement, and it's intended to be that way. So as we read this, and I will read this out loud just because I think it helps to hear it and see it, it will appear very dense, and that is intentional. This is about moving from thoughting to thinking. What does this cause us to do in terms of work into what this is about and what this work is about, so that we're not just saying, oh yeah, I get that. So
Bill,
yeah,
someone just texted or put in the chat, so what is thoughting? So the idea is that thoughting is repeating a thought that we had before or someone else had that we heard or read, and thinking is having a creative idea, seeing from a different perspective. And we're using words in a way that's a little difficult, so we can't just blow through it and say, oh yeah, you're right. That we have to think, well, what does regeneration mean? What does orient mean? Why are we talking about a field of caring?
We're talking about developing. And so the idea here is it pushes us off our stability to relook, to look fresh. Well, let me read this. And what we'd like to do is have a conversation about what you understand, what maybe we might want to shift. This is a work in process, and we are not foisting this upon you. It's a way to start a conversation and to deepen. No different than the story that Joel just shared. This actually needs work as well. So here's our candidate purpose statement for this series. To develop an initial understanding of the potential for the regeneration of the Mad River Valley in a way that orients and aligns the field of caring and action required, so that this becomes an ongoing developmental process within the human and non-human community of the Valley. So happy to hear any comments about this, or somebody might say, would you please translate that? And if you do have that question, then let's talk about specific terms. We want to get our heads around this.
Could you explain which, I realize that you're not trying to prescribe something for us, but what do you mean by regeneration? I mean, I have a vision of what regeneration may look like, but I would be interested to hear what your concept is.
Good.
Well, what's your vision, Bob?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think, regeneration, I mean, you can look at it in a material standpoint of recycling to sort of taking something that makes, you put it into something, you take that same product, the scrap of that product, and put it into something else, and that allows you to build another product. And so that's in the material side. And then the regeneration of, let's just talk about agriculture. I'm not very knowledgeable there, but I think by recycling certain plots of land, you are regenerating the soil and whatnot. So there's many applications. So I think, what do you, to try and answer this, to say, what's the potential of regeneration? I think just to throw that out there is all well and good, but I think there has to be a little bit more structure to the question in terms of what are we conceptualizing as regeneration, and what levels and what formats?
I think a little bit you have to go to that last line, which is within the human and non-human community of the valley. So how would we regenerate the river, the soils, the forests, the businesses, the spirit, the community, the educate. How would we, literally regenerate means to be reborn,
right,
at a higher level. So how would we not just, as Kenny was saying, keep the river from getting too screwed up or restore it some, but so that it had the vitality to continually get stronger and better and develop itself. And that's true for the soils and the forests and the businesses and everything else.
Joel, I don't, what you just laid out could be a couple days worth of conversation.
Precisely.
And so it's like, okay, that's what I'm thinking. That's my question is how in a, within 40 minutes, can we even give that justice to think about how that would be? I agree with everything you said, but.
Well, Bob, we can't do it in 40 minutes. And so that's why we're very precise about that, to develop an initial understanding. So we are just touching on this.
I'm trying to get to the understanding of what it really means, regeneration.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have some thoughts on that?
I just want to say something, that this 2-part series is to initiate a longer series, right? For the very reasons that you're talking about, Bob, is that this is a very long conversation, and particularly if we're going to make it grounded and realizable.
And we're not trying to be obtuse here. We'll share with you our perspective, but it would be more important to hear others' perspectives on this.
Well, I have a second question to that, but I won't. So we've been trying to have this conversation in the Valley. Okay. So how do we get to be totally inclusive within the Valley and make it one that people are willing to have and put the time and energy into? To me, that's the biggest challenge, if you will, to really tackling and bringing and enabling something as what you're talking about in a general standpoint to even begin to happen. Yes, talking about the river specifically, we can get focus on, but to get to the broad aspect of what you're putting on the table here is really challenging.
It is.
And it's the same cast of characters all the time. And then, but that's not inclusive. So how do we do that?
It's an excellent question. I'm going to ask you to hold it, Bob, because it's a really important one. And it's a little bit beyond our scope today. And the end of our session and the homework between now and the next time is to look at what are all of the things that are restraining us. Because you did a classic thing, which is true, which is to say, that's really important. And one of the restraints is, how do we get the right people? How do we make this inclusive? Right? So Bill started out asking for a little bit of patience, because we have to bring up both sides of those before we're able to deal with the restraints.
Yeah, the interesting thing about working with a whole system, if you recall the Buddhist parable, the blind man and the elephant, it takes a while to walk around the elephant to understand what you have. And so we're just beginning that. But let me tell you, Bob, it is possible. And we've seen this in cities around the world, but it requires us to actually see something that actually is meaningful for a majority of people. So that's what we're unfolding. It's one of the reasons why Joel started with the story, and how do we actually build that and build on that.
Could you clarify or define or translate what you mean by aligning the field of caring, a defined field of caring for me? And are you suggesting an alignment between the field of caring and action required, or are those two not connected in the same phrase somehow?
They're related for sure. But the field of caring is what Bob was speaking of to some degree, is how do we get multiple stakeholders aligned in this field of caring? And out of that caring comes action.
One of the things that we know, having worked in green building and sustainability and all those things for decades, is that it's not a matter of the techniques or technologies. It's a matter of political will. And unless we are aligned about what we care about, we will not act. And we will not act in an aligned and oriented way to create the transformations we're after. And it's a part of what's behind what Bob is talking about, right? Unless we can actually create a coherent field of caring, we're not going to do what we need to do. And we're going to be scattershot, and we're going to do shotgun approaches. We're going to work on the river. We're going to work on the economy. We're going to work on drug abuse. We're going to work on homelessness, affordable housing, and they're going to be done in isolation instead of in a coherent way.
So field of caring is the collective ideas of what people care about and might want to work on changing. Is that close?
Yes, what people are motivated by to act.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great, important questions.
Bill.
Yeah.
Could I add something to your field of caring?
Sure.
You talk about the human and non-human community in Valley, and I'm feeling from what we've been talking about, the non-human is like cows and that type of thing. We haven't talked about the wild community, and I think that's such an important, huge, important part of this valley, which is slowly disintegrating by land use and lack of what E.O. Wilson thinks, that unless we save at least half of this earth for the animals, this earth is not sustainable. And I have a feeling he's close to being true. And this valley has the potential to give wildlife a chance to live here too, very compatibly with us. But we're slowly disintegrating this valley by parceling it off piece by piece, almost imperceptibly. And that part of the valley, which is critical to it, us, is disappearing.
Well said, and that's exactly what we were implying with non-human, Eric. But that is stuff we can capture that in the thoughts to carry forward.
And that's even, we're thinking of the river as a non-human part of the community, and the rocks and the trees and the earth and the earthworms, and we're talking about everything in the valley. So thank you, because that's important. And I even love, it's in the name Friends of the Mad River, right? If the Mad River is not a being, how can you be its friend?
So there are some comments here in the chat that I think are worth capturing. Regeneration, this is from Wynn. Regeneration implies that something has been damaged or lost. Is this the assumption for this discussion? Well, I'm going to reflect that right back to others.
Bill, could you?
Hey, Bill.
For me, regeneration is about systems change of like everything that is, like you were saying, a rebirth. And it seems like for systems change to really be effective, it really needs to come from a place of care, purpose, and what do I care about? And then it requires out of that, alignment together, and that can lead to concrete action together. Which it seems like that's what you're.
That's where we're going.
Saying.
Yep. Do you agree with that? You have a disagreement with that?
No, I think it's. To me, it totally makes sense.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you. Let's see here.
And I think that I just want to say, Bill, that addresses this thing of that. I wouldn't say regeneration implies that something's been damaged. I would say restoration or healing does. I don't think that's the same as regeneration.
The same or Joel? That was a hanging Chad.
Okay. I'll be brief then. So the pattern of ecological succession is one of punctuated equilibrium, that there can always be further development and regeneration of ecosystems, of all kinds of systems, human systems, and it doesn't necessarily imply something's been damaged. Restoration certainly does. My antique chair got damaged and I need to fix it. Right? And it's, for me, one of the important distinctions between restoration and regeneration. And regeneration is always from inside, it's never from outside.
So this is about regenerating our capability to engage in a new way, different way, in an ongoing way is actually more important. So in the concept of regeneration, the RE is really important here. It's not a one-time thing. It's basically a continually rebirth, a rebirth, a rebirth. So birth, life, death, rebirth cycles, birth, life, death, rebirth. You take it a year as a period. How do we do? Was it good? Was it bad? How can we improve? So it assumes that life is dynamic and that we need to be participating with it. Yeah, stop us if we don't want to be, we're not trying to be flippant, group. There's just a lot to do in a short time. So, but please stop us if you feel like we haven't given enough.
Bill, could I add one thing?
Sure, Corey.
I just wanted to say to everyone, in case you joined late or there's just been disjointed pieces of this message, we just want to be clear to folks that we know this is like a really big topic and we're not going to accomplish all of it in these 2 workshops. And the intention here is to see if we can get a group of people together that is interested in pursuing this sort of bigger, deeper conversation. So we're going to try to touch on these ideas now, get a general sense from folks and try to understand if you're interested in more deeper conversation.
Thanks, Corey. So one point here from Beth, where'd that go? The resonant word for me is sustainability as opposed to the word regeneration. Good. And so the question that, how do we sustain our lively, creative, and innovative community without losing the beauty, health, and well-being of this land? Beautiful. And the distinction that we would make in that, and the reason why we're using the term regeneration is that how do we, another way, how do we sustain sustainability? You achieve something, right? But life keeps moving on. So the sustaining can actually be, in some people's mind, can be ossifying, can actually be calcifying. And so you can pick any word you want, but the idea is, and we realize that there's all sorts of nuances, but the reason why we make that distinction is so many people feel that if I build a sustainable building, whatever that means, then I'm done. And obviously there's so much more work to be done. So that's how we mean it. I hope that helps, Beth. Please opine if not.
Bob Dylan said, whoever isn't busy being born is busy dying.
Nice. So here's something from Rebecca. Regeneration as related to the population. We can't recruit lower income and middle income families because of the lack of housing. We struggle to keep lower income and middle income families here because of the lack of childcare. Fair enough. That's an opportunity. Are we considering, from Dave, I don't know how to pronounce it, Hades? Sorry, Dave, butchering your name. Are we considering evolution rather than regeneration? The simple answer to that, regeneration is evolution. And from Beth, regenerate our right relationships between the forces of the natural world and our human community. Right on target.
So I just want to build on what you just said. That's what's in this third piece, so that this becomes an ongoing developmental process within the human and non-human community of the Valley. So some people object to the word evolution being used for anything but speciesization. And so that's why we're using this term development, that it is about this idea that the way we address all of our problems is to grow beyond that.
And if you look, development is a synonym for evolution, interestingly enough. So same thing. From Kurt, if we mean ongoing regeneration, perhaps we should move to the verb regenerating. I think that's a very good comment. And the gerund is continually active, right? And Richard says, remember, you can save the chat. Save the chat, Richard. Copy it. Okay, any other, I don't know if we've really unpacked this. We don't want to beat it to death, but is this helping you to become clear?
I'd say for myself, some ways, yes. Because it's making me to start think about, like I could say, gee, remember when we did this and we're not doing it anymore? And gee, that group is doing some good stuff. Have they talked to? So it starts making me feel about how we can fall into a way of things going on that are more, we do things in silos.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of say, well, there's a group doing this and a group doing that. And local government is doing this, and this all sounds really good. But those particular activities and goals, all these groups in silos that are doing very great things really need to be talking to each other, and then they could do even greater things.
Yes, absolutely. And this work, by the way, in our experience, begins to bring so many disparate groups together, the de-siloization, because we're integrating around being in service to the larger system, not just our siloed problems. And it doesn't mean the siloed problems don't get solved, but they get solved within this vessel of the potential and the necessary relationships to get health in this particular place, which is why Joel was going through this, what we call a story of place. What is the essence of this valley that we actually can respond to and engage in a way that will carry forward and not fight Mother Nature?
Yes. And if you remain in silos, I think it becomes a very dangerous way to start looking at power rather than the community.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can get very powerful interest groups that tend to push down others with value. And I think if you have groups that are working, and people don't even realize a lot of times that you're really saying the same thing. You just might have different ways of getting there or ideas to share on how to get there. And if you do that, you've got a better sense of community and participation rather than, gee, we become a really powerful group and we can get our stuff done.
Right. And that I just highlighted what this is really about. It's about aligning people, and it's not going to happen right away. And that's why this is an ongoing evolutionary or developmental process. It continually builds, but it builds for a higher purpose, which is this human to human and non-human community in the valley. How do we actually create a thriving relationship, not something that's not occupying the land, but inhabiting the land? All right. We're generally okay with this. We don't need to parse it to the nth degree, but let's move on, shall we? Oh, Joel, you want to share the outcomes?
I think maybe we should keep moving because we're running out of time.
We sure are. Yeah. Okay. So let's. What next? I don't have the.
Go to the next slide. We can just skip over the next slide, and we're going to do another breakout room. That we've been talking about the essence of this place, who it is, how it is, and we'd love you to talk to one another about what are your global imperatives? What are the unacceptable futures we feel we must respond to and address, the non-negotiables? And that might have to do with diversity. It might have to do with the ecosystems. It might have to do with climate change. It might have to do with affordable housing and childcare and the diversity of the valley and the valley communities. So we're going to be talking about what is it that we're moved by, right? And also, what are the emerging trends? What are the shifting dynamics that indicate more effective ways of working in the future? One of the things Bill and I were talking about this morning is at Regenesis, we started this online educational process 8 years ago. And it's been an ongoing trend, and we're really glad now that we did, because we've been able to keep our education work going in this COVID world, right? So what are the things that are starting to emerge that might tell us how to work in the future? And some of the things people have talked about is regenerative agriculture has become a big deal. 15 years ago, it was not, right? Regenerative, almost everything has become a big deal. When we started Regenesis, nobody used the word, right? So what are the emerging trends, and what are the things that we must work on? And we're going to put you in breakout groups.